All right. Good evening.
Good evening.
There we go. That was to you. I don't say that to the people online because I'm not going to know whether or not they respond. I'm saying that to you people.
That's irrelevant. They hear you say it. They think you're talking about to them.
I guess. I don't know. Yes. Please do not have a parasocial relationship with me through a camera. That's weird. Okay. Anyway. Yeah. It's really gross looking weather outside, but we're all here, so that's nice. And it might not look it because we have a two-sided handout, but I think tonight's going to be short, which means absolutely nothing because this could be very long. But there's only 12 verses tonight in chapter 10. So I mean you can only stretch that so far. But anyway, you'll notice on your handout there is an overlap. We're doing 1 through 6, and then we're also doing 6 through 12. So that's because verse 6 is kind of relevant to what I want to say for the first half and also kind of relevant for what I want to say to the second half.
Did you say there was a backside to this sheet?
Is there not?
Not on mine.
Just pretend like there's elevator music going and a sign that says technical difficulties. I don't know why it didn't.
You have to punch the 2 to 2 button to get both sides.
Yeah.
Because I've done that many times myself.
Just make a separate sheet of
1,
the back
2,
side.
3, 4, 5, 6.
I keep forgetting it's 24. I haven't caught up yet.
Okay, now they're not in color, so just pretend like there's these really nicely colored blank spaces, and you're really impressed with my technical prowess.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
The same thing.
got it out to it.
All right, we're all good, right? I gave you one, right? Okay. We're all good. We all have 3 questions on the back, or 3 bullet points on the back, right?
Yes.
Okay. I love Wednesdays. This is so much fun. Anyway, yeah, there is an overlap. We're doing 1 through 6 and then 6 through 12. But anyway, you'll kind of see why that is the case. Anyway, okay, without any further distractions, hopefully, let's read the first 6 verses. Zechariah chapter 10. Ask the Lord for rain in the time of latter rain. The Lord will make flashing clouds. He will give them showers of rain, grass in the field for everyone. For the idols speak delusion. The diviners envision lies and tell false dreams. They comfort in vain. Therefore the people win their way like sheep. They are in trouble because there is no shepherd. My anger is kindled against the shepherds, and I will punish the goatherds. For the Lord of hosts will visit his flock, the house of Judah, and will make them as his royal horse in the battle. From him comes the cornerstone, from him the tent peg, from him the battle bow, from him every ruler together. They shall be like mighty men who tread down their enemies, who in the mire of the streets in the battle. They shall fight because the Lord is with them, and the riders on horses shall be put to shame. I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will say, because I have mercy on them. They shall be as though I had not cast them aside, for I am the Lord their God, and I will hear them. So, your original sheet, I think, had the very nicely colored, blue-colored blank spaces for you to write in. Just pretend like that's the case with the revised version I just did. So once again, we have a lot of, and your first blank is restoration. We have a lot of restoration language. And we've seen this elsewhere in Zechariah. We got into some of this last week, and we said, a lot of this, is relevant for the time in which Zechariah was giving it. It's relevant in the Messianic era, the church era, even maybe, relevant for, sort of a end times view. So we have a lot of that same restoration language. And then some examples are strengthening the house of Judah, saving the house of Joseph, bringing them back from the land of Egypt, gathering them from Assyria, and then ultimately bringing them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon. And all this is found within the first 6 verses. But you have strengthening, saving, bringing them back, gathering them, bringing them into. And then finally, Egypt and Assyria are foretold as being brought down eventually. So, the restoration of the exiles, both the exiles themselves as people and also their home, that took some time, right? Y'all are kind of like Tornado Alley. That might be a little bit different because that might hit like a town. I grew up in Hurricane Alley, and that will wipe out like an entire geographical region. And like the storm might be over, but like it's going to be like in some cases literal years before we're back to where we were. In terms of rebuilding and infrastructure, and even population. In some places never recover. They just basically wash away into the ocean like Atlantis. This kind of thing takes time. We're technically in Zechariah post-exile. We have clear references in the first 6 chapters. Joshua, Zerubbabel, we're rebuilding the temple, we're reinstituting temple worship, and it's very clear we're post-exile. Even here in the last half. That being said, these words of restoration, they're still bringing hope for the remnant community, and they're still relevant because, these exiles are still awaiting the full restoration of Judah and Jerusalem. And ultimately, they're still waiting the full reversal of, that disbursement from the exile. Everyone's kind of, dispersed wherever. We gave a likely date for Zechariah 9 to 14 as sort of late 6th or early 5th century BC. And, even though, like I said, we are technically post-exile, the exile community was still rebuilding and regrouping. And so keep all of that in mind. With that said, the first sort of bullet point is was kindled versus is kindled. This is coming obviously from verse 3. The New King James, and I'm sure like any translation probably that y'all are using, my anger is kindled against the shepherd. Verse 3 is kind of difficult to understand, and it's not because it's necessarily a very difficult concept, but we aren't exactly sure how it's supposed to be translated. And the first sort of issue with that is, again, the phrase, my anger is kindled. And the New King James translates it as this. The NIV translates it similarly, my anger burns. It's all sort of in the present tense. But, this could also be translated in the perfect tense. And the Septuagint actually opts for this translation of the Hebrew. And so it translates it as my anger was kindled or something along those lines. What is the difference, right? Why does this matter? If God's anger was kindled against the shepherds, right, the leaders of Judah, the implication is that God was angry during the time of the exile, or even possibly before the exile, and that's what led to the exile. God was angry at the shepherds of Judah, right? God was angry with the kings and the leaders of previous time. And just as that anger led to pretty major consequences like the exile, right, God is also presently angry with the new rulers of Judah, right? Because he goes on, God will punish the goat herds, or, the NIV just translates it, I will punish the leaders, right? So basically, then the point becomes, okay, just as in the past, I was angry with the shepherds, I'm also now angry with the shepherds. And just as I did punish you, so I will punish you. Right. And so if this is the case, then perhaps judgment is implied, even if it's not directly stated. I mean, who wants a repeat of an exile? Who wants exile 2.0? Nobody wants that. And it's kind of interesting, right? The Septuagint and other scholars, independent translations, will translate the first phrase as "my anger was kindled against the shepherd," but the Septuagint translates the second phrase as "I will care for the lambs," as opposed to "I will punish the goat herds" or "I will punish the leaders." So even this phrase, I mean, depending on how it's translated, can have implications for the verse's meaning. Is God himself going to be taking up the role of shepherd due to the failure of in previous times? Or is it, like we talked about earlier, is it just emphasizing, okay, as in the past, so too now in the present? And, I mean, obviously this idea of God as shepherd is stated pretty directly elsewhere in verse 3, phrases like, "For the Lord of hosts will visit his flock, he will make them as his royal horse in battle." And basically, I mean, the issue then becomes, okay, is this a comparison? Okay, God's anger was against the leaders of Judah during the exile, against the leaders of Judah, which, that comparison then leads to the rest of, okay, because of the repeated failures of shepherds, of the leaders of Judah, God himself is going to take up the role of being Judah's shepherd. Or is it just strictly a contrast? God was angry with the leaders of Judah. Now he himself will be Judah's shepherd and will care for them. I mean, it all basically points to the same thing. But I think that contrast is significant in terms of, okay, and I mean, even going on to the next bullet point, I mean, assuming that the main idea of the text is basically the shepherds or the leaders of Judah during the exile, like in verse 2, it says, spoke delusions, envisioned lies, told false dreams, comforted in vain, all these things. They were doing that during the exile. The shepherds presently in the time of Zechariah are the same way. And because of that repeated failure, God himself will shepherd Judah. And I think that that's pretty significant and probably what is being said here. So assuming that that's the case, then just as there could be the implication of judgment directly stated, there could also be the implication of the reversal of judgment. So your shepherds were evil and you were punished in the exile. Similarly, in the time of Zechariah, your shepherds are evil and you will be punished. But your shepherds were evil, and because of that, which included wandering like sheep and being oppressed because you lacked a shepherd, but you will be brought back and strengthened, right? Verse 6, by the Lord. So there's kind of a chart that I made to try to hopefully make this a little bit easier. I even did this for myself because, I mean, this is a lot of comparing and contrasting and cause and effect. Basically, different ways to look at this. Translating it all in terms of the present. Your shepherds are evil currently. The effect of that is God is angry. And the contrast of that is just a very kind of generic, God's going to restore Judah. Nothing wrong with that. It's fine. Going on, if you want to translate the part as, perfect tense or past tense, your shepherds were evil. Because of that, you were punished with the exile. And then the contrast with that is just, well, your shepherds are evil and you will be punished. So just as there was, implying that, okay, you were punished, or saying that you were punished with exile, then the implication is, okay, your shepherds are evil today. There's going to be a future punishment for that, just as I punished you previously. And then the third row, your shepherds were evil. The effect of that is you wandered like sheep and were oppressed. The contrast of this is you will be brought back in strength. Or if you want to translate it as the present, your shepherds are evil. God is angry. God himself will be Judah's shepherd. And that applies to the second phrase, I will punish the goat herders. That is present regardless. So, anyway, yeah, sort of contrasting. Okay, y'all are wicked and I punished you. You're still wicked. I'm going to punish you, but also I'm going to bring about the reversal of that initial punishment of exile. Right? You were dispersed and scattered and oppressed, and you're going to be brought back, and you're not going to be oppressed. You're going to be strengthened. So, pretty significant. So anyway, verses 6 through 12. So rereading verse 6 and then reading the last half of the chapter. I will strengthen the house of Judah, and I will save the house of Joseph. I will bring them back because I have mercy on them. They shall be as though I had not cast them aside, for I am the Lord their God, and I will hear them. Those of Ephraim shall be like a mighty man, and their heart shall rejoice as if with wine. Yes, their children shall see it and be glad. Their heart shall rejoice in the Lord. I will whistle for them and gather them, for I will redeem them, and they shall increase as they once increased. I will sow them among the peoples, and they shall remember me in far countries. They shall live together with their children, and they shall return. I will also bring them back from the land of Egypt, and gather them from Assyria. I will bring them into the land of Gilead and Lebanon, until no more room is found for them. He shall pass through the sea with affliction, and strike the waves of the sea. The depths of the rivers shall dry up. Then the pride of Assyria shall be brought down, and the scepter of Egypt shall depart. So I will strengthen them in the Lord, and they shall walk up and down in his name, says the Lord. So we have a little bit of a problem here because we're dealing with, as it says, the house of Joseph and those of Ephraim, and these are all northern tribe names. It says in verse 9, you're going to be sown among the peoples. Well, obviously, the northern tribe, more than the southern tribe even, were sown among the peoples. They were exiled, they were scattered, and in a sense, they were lost. They call it like the lost tribes of Israel for a reason. The problem here, right, it comes when we read that these same people, according to verse 10, will be brought back. And, we know, this never really happened. At least to the degree that Zechariah seems to indicate. Obviously, there were some people that, they were brought back and, sort of joined the, new southern kingdom. But, for the main part, any cultural or ethnic identity that they had, they lost. So, what do we make of this? Well, before we get into that, we have first bullet point, I will strengthen the house of Judah. Before anything is said of Ephraim or all of that, the beginning of verse 6 says, I will strengthen the house of Judah. And remember, Zechariah is prophesying to the Judeans, right? Even this chapter is focused on the people of Judah and their evil shepherds or their evil leaders. Right? God promises to strengthen Judah because he himself will be Judah's shepherd. And then that leads into a discussion about, okay, well, what about these other people? What about these other people that were exiled and, they went away in Israel. Now they're this conglomeration of who knows what. And so then that leads us to the second bullet point. I will save the house of Joseph. I will bring them back, right? Judah has already been brought back, right? And that's not to say that, every single person that was exiled from Judah was brought back. But they were allowed to return, and they did, on a large scale. And for the most part, they retained that ethnic identity and that heritage. This is sort of when you have the transition from Israelite to just Jew. Jew being short basically for Judean, from Judah, right? In the New Testament, I mean, it's, the word Jew a lot of the time, not necessarily Israelite. Because, I mean, the other 10 tribes, they were exiled. They just settled down, married the local women. They kind of lost any heritage or ethnic identity. But Judah, on the other hand, right, I mean, they've already been brought back. The northern tribes haven't, right? They've been dispersed. They're lost essentially, like we said. And so it says, okay, I'm going to strengthen Judah. Well, that's because Judah's already been brought back. But before the northern tribes can be brought back, before the northern tribes can be strengthened, they have to be brought back. That's why, I will bring back the house of Joseph. But again, I mean, this is where we have this problem. They weren't really brought back, right? Before, they can be strengthened, they must be returned. Before they can be returned, they must be scattered or sown. I mean, okay, we at least got that part. I mean, they were scattered, they were sown away from their homeland. They intermarried, they settled down, they lost their their racial heritage. Okay, what do we do about bringing them back? Well, I mean, so in the process of, settling down, intermarrying, all of that, they didn't necessarily lose their status as the people of God. Neither did they, by not intermarrying, retain their status of the people of God. Right? I mean, all throughout the Bible, I mean, the people of God is not an ethnic identity, right? There are Gentiles who are people of God. There are Israelites, Jews who are people of God. And that's found throughout all of Scripture. So just because they aren't retaining necessarily any distinct ethnic or cultural identity does not mean that all of a sudden, well, darn, now I'm no longer God's child. So while they're scattered, even though, they might have lost their heritage or lost their ethnic identity, verse 9 says, they shall remember me in far countries. Okay, so we're not necessarily talking about northern tribes as a whole. We're talking about the remnant of the spiritual remnant of the northern tribes. So keep that in mind. And once again, the people or the children of God were not just solely one race of people, right? God obviously primarily revealed himself in the Old Testament to Israel and through Israel. Now Israel as a whole is kind of no more. I mean, the northern kingdom fell and never really bounced back. The southern kingdom returned from exile and they rebuilt. They never really went back to their former glory. They were kind of a shell of what they used to be. The remnant of the northern kingdom that, as it says, remembered the Lord even while they were dispersed, even while they were God's people just as much as the Judeans living in Jerusalem who weren't dispersed, who kept their ethnic or cultural identity. And that's significant because, right, we talked about earlier, Joshua and Zerubbabel for the southern kingdom were in a sense paving the way for the beginning of the Messianic age, right? We're rebuilding the temple, we're reinstituting temple worship and sacrifice, and that is paving the way for the Messianic age. And so there's this sort of, we can't really place a hard start date on when the Messianic age really begins. It's this sort of overlap of the end of the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the Messianic age. So similar to how, right, Joshua and Zerubbabel are paving the way for the Messianic age, the southern kingdom, the spiritual remnant of the northern kingdom, is also paving the way for the Messianic age. The Messianic age and the church age is all about how the people of God are not and have never been one race of people, right? The spiritual remnant of the northern kingdom, they were scattered. They settled down, they intermarried, and I mean, they're even lost today, But that remnant that remained faithful to God were still God's people, even more so than a Judean who never intermarried and still lived in Judah and still, worshipped in Jerusalem. Even more so than a Judean who never intermarried and lived and worshipped in Jerusalem, who, wasn't actually following God. That is what I meant to add, obviously. Right. So, we have, you're dispersed and you go out, but while you're dispersed, you're remembering me and you're still my people, right? Even though you're dispersed, even though, maybe your, ethnic identity is a little watered down now. Maybe you've lost some of your heritage from when you were living like in Israel, but you're still my people. And they're paving the way for the Messianic age and the church age. Because now, I mean, are they really Israelites? At what point do you stop being one group of people and you start being another group of people, right? I mean, we see this in Oklahoma. I'm not trying to start any sort of political debate, but I mean, you got dudes that are whiter than me that are like on the rolls for Indian benefits. I'm not saying that that's not how it should be. I'm just saying that that's how it is. At what point do you stop being a Native American and you start being whatever else, you're mixed with? I don't have any sort of distinct ethnic identity. I'm basically a mixture of like a half a dozen European races, basically. So I mean, I don't really have any dog in any sort of ethnic purity debate or anything, but so these people, these Northern Kingdom people, they're exiled, they intermarry. Are they really even Israelites at this point? It doesn't matter, right? Because Israelite, not Israelite, they're still the people of God. They're still God's people. Not because of their ethnic identity, but because while they're exiled, they remember God. And they're following God, and they're trusting God, and they're serving God. And the Messianic age and the church age, I mean, while that teaching has always been the case, it's even more prominent then. You have Jesus' own people reject him for the most part. And then meanwhile, the Gentiles who didn't have the old covenant, didn't have the prophets, didn't have Moses, all this, for the most part, accept him. And so the people of God is not a nationality or it's not a race, but it's all people who obey God. So anyway, the final bullet point, I will also bring them back from the land of Egypt and gather them from the land of Syria. So, right, Zechariah is painting a picture of God bringing back the Northern Kingdom. And, this never really happened in any sort of physical sense. I mean, they never even rebuilt the Southern Kingdom that it once was before the exile. Okay, we'll allow you to go back. We'll allow you to rebuild your homes and your walls and your temples, but you better remember who's in charge. That kind of thing. For the Southern Kingdom, the Northern Kingdom, I mean, they didn't even get that. They were just, now you're here, now you're gone. The Northern Kingdom was dispersed. The spiritual remnant was dispersed, and because of that, for the spiritual remnant of the Northern Kingdom, okay, well now the worship of God is much more far-reaching. It's not just Israel, it's not just Samaria, but now it's all over the place, right? Think back to the 8th division. You have the chariots, they're leaving the dwelling place of God, and they're going out, to the whole world, right? The dwelling place of God, in one sense it always has been, especially, again, the beginning of the Messianic age, is now the whole world, right? As, God's revelation is now not limited to Israel or Judah, but to the whole world. We looked at, the prophecy of Judah in this chapter. And rightfully so, we think, well, this is spiritual restoration, right? You've had bad shepherds, you've had bad leaders in the past, you have bad leaders now, I'm going to be your shepherd. And we think, okay, well, obviously this is spiritual language, right? Jesus probably did not walk around with a shepherding staff, I mean, there's pictures where he does, and those are kind of cool. But he probably, he was not vocationally a shepherd. So this is spiritual restoration. Then we get to this part, and it's talking about, okay, I'm going to bring you back. But we want to think of this very, very literally. And we want to think of we're literally going to bring these people back and literally rebuild a kingdom. But I mean, even the southern kingdom, which was brought back, I mean, even they didn't really rebuild their kingdom. I mean, they rebuilt their temple, they rebuilt their walls. But I mean, yeah, they were politically always sort of under someone else, and never as independent or influential as they once were. This is not a prophecy about physical, the physical race of Israel. This is a prophecy essentially to all people who worship God wherever they might be. And this is found contextually in Zechariah 10. I mean, you have dispersion, you have, remembering the Lord, and you have restoration. This is especially found in the New Testament. Romans 9, 6 through 13, right? It's not every single descendant of Abraham or every single descendant of Isaac or even every single descendant of Jacob or Israel that is God's people. And in a way, by the spiritual remnant of the northern kingdom being dispersed and losing their identity, but retaining their spirituality, by retaining their dedication to the Lord, they're painting away once again for the time in which, as Paul says, right, though you're a wild olive shoot, you've been grafted in among the others and now share in the same nourishing sap from the olive root. Romans 11:17. So, right, the bringing back and the gathering of the northern kingdom, right, it's not to establish or reestablish a physical northern kingdom. Even the southern kingdom never really physically reestablished itself as an independent kingdom to any successful degree. And it's the same with the northern kingdom. I mean, the bringing back is spiritual. Israel was scattered physically because of their spiritual rebellion to God. And so the people who remained faithful while being scattered will be brought back to the Lord, right? That's the bringing back, is you're being brought back to me. Just as with Judah, okay, you've been brought back physically, I'm going to strengthen you spiritually. I'm going to be your shepherd. The northern kingdom was never really brought back physically, but God doesn't just say, okay, well, forget you people. God says, no, I'm going to bring you back spiritually. I'm going to bring you back essentially to myself. So it's a spiritual return. And I mean, like I've been saying a lot in Zechariah, I mean, this ultimately culminates in the incarnation of Jesus Christ, God becoming man. Ultimately, I mean, both the prophecy to the southern kingdom and the northern kingdom is how this culminates. Southern kingdom, God is going to be their shepherd. Jesus literally calls himself the good shepherd. And Matthew even uses, quotes from the next chapter, Zechariah 11, in reference to Jesus. For the northern kingdom, it's, okay, I'm going to bring you back. You were dispersed, but you remained faithful to me while being dispersed, and I'm going to bring you back to myself. I mean, when Jesus came, he said, first, to the Jew first, but then to the Gentile, the whole world, people who are dispersed. Paul calls them a nation without a nation, or a nation without land, everywhere, basically. And so, this all sort of culminates in Jesus Christ. So once again, we're dealing with the very early stages of the initiation of the Messianic age. And, we're at this overlap, the end of the Old Testament era, the beginning of the New Testament era. And, the northern kingdom, they're scattering and being dispersed. It brings about Gentiles who fear God. It says, they didn't just get dispersed and then say, okay, well, I guess we'll just die alone. But, Those of Ephraim shall be like a mighty man. Their heart shall rejoice. Their children shall see it and be glad, right? I mean, these people, they settle down, marry the local women, have some kids. Why not? Settle down, be happy. Right? And, okay, well, you're the remnant and you marry some foreign woman and you worship God. Well, now she's worshiping God. Now your kids are worshiping God, right? And you have Gentiles worshiping God, which is, you see that all throughout the Messianic age, the church age. It's all about, God's direct revelation of himself going out to the whole world. Right. So, it points to a time in which a new and better covenant will be instituted in which both Jew and Gentile will worship God, not worship God by circumcising ourselves and not eating pork or whatever, but, right, worshiping God through God's Son, Jesus Christ, worshiping in spirit and in truth. So anyway, hopefully that all made sense. It actually was rather short. It's only 6:37, so there you go. Any questions about any of that? All right.
Not me.
In that case, hand it over to Lester.